Okay, welcome, everyone. Thank you for showing up at this event, and I'm really pleased to be here, speaking here again. I've spoken at IBTM a few times in the past. Kind of what I want to talk about today is, and what I do now for a living, is help agencies start to use sort of precognition to understand what's happening in the future so that they can make better current decisions that help them avoid some rough spots down the road. So it's about how to embrace the future and practices that your organization can use to help you better navigate the future as the events industry changes. And I'm going to use the events industry as the case study for that. First, I'll tell you a little bit about me. You can see I was an early technology adopter up there in the left-hand corner. Got in early. Became a teacher, actually, and a filmmaker, and then ultimately went into publishing as a writer and an analyst. Moved to the UK 30 years ago because I got married to a Brit, and have been hanging out here in the UK ever since. I worked for these companies during that period. I was the managing director of George P. Johnson, Europe, Middle East, and Africa. I launched the Freeman XP brand internationally. And I also launched MCI Experience, which was the corporate strategic division of MCI Group. So I've been doing events for a pretty long time. I have a fair amount of experience in them of all kinds, including Comdex. For those of you who may remember Comdex, you may not. It used to be the largest trade show in the world. 6,500 exhibitors, 225,000 attendees in Las Vegas. Every November, and also took place under license in 22 countries around the world, and I was the president of Comdex. So a fair amount of experience, and as I say, now I'm with Experience Design, helping agencies embrace change. So I'm going to tell you the whole punchline of my talk, so if you have to leave, you could say, okay, here's ultimately what he said. I think it's inevitable that advances in technology are going to challenge and disrupt the events industry. I don't think we have any choice in that matter, despite our willingness to sort of try to avoid the changes that are happening all around us because it threatens our business model, and mainly because I think event attendees are going to change and are changing pretty dramatically. And some of the things that we are used to and put up with, we won't in the future because it's inefficient, it's unsustainable, and it's not very effective either, generally. I mean, these kinds of rooms and these kinds of settings, sometimes they're not the best format for what we're trying to achieve. And I think you're going to see that it can either be, the events industry can either be a victim of this change, that is trying to deny it as they go build backwards, do all the things they used to do the old-fashioned way, and for the most part right here in 2022, we are seeing a lot of that, or they can embrace change and be the architects of the future. And that is, we can begin to create our own vision of what the events industry should look like in the future, and where we have the ability and the resources to do that. So embracing change and adopting means adopting new approaches, and I think it can really help us reimagine what we mean when we say experiences, and I think that's going to be really important. So first of all, where have we been? Look, I think it's important to say that for the last 2 years, I think a lot of us feel like we've had our head in a box, couldn't go to events, couldn't really talk about events. Most places were shut down. And it was a big change from 2019, which was one of the biggest revenue-generating years for live events in history. So when people refer to 2019, it really was, in fact, the heyday. And back in 2019, we were, look at the kinds of percentages we saw. This is a B2B marketing zone, web equity. 43% plan to spend 30% or more on their total budget. That's corporate marketing budget on events. It's unheard of. When I started out in the events world, if you got 10, 15, you were living large. If you got 20, you were riding high. These kinds of percentages were never the kinds of percentages we saw. And here, 26% plan to spend 50% or more. Now, what's really important here is they're talking about events and event marketing, but we're really talking about brand experience and customer engagement, which is not always necessarily what we think about when we say event. When we say event, we think of this, a podium and chairs like this. But we're talking about lots of different kinds of experiences that were being funded. But even still, in 2019, we were setting up our registration desks. Depending on what your name ended, you know where to go to get your badge. We were jamming people into rooms. And even, I have to tell you, I was at the Marketing Society conference 2 weeks ago, and it was a room of chairs with a podium in the front at the QE2 in London. And someone literally said out loud, I know some of you in the back of the room can't actually read this slide, so I'll just tell you what it says. That's in 2022. And that's the kind of thing that we still put up with. And of course, we love it. We love coming and jamming in, building lots of stuff, getting colorful, having meetings. And 2019, this was booming. And of course, live events are fun. You get to do things you probably wouldn't do at home. I mean, I've occasionally worn a box on my head at home, but typically I would have waited to be at some kind of convention after a few beers. And so the industry in 2019 was booming. More live events than we've ever seen in history around the world, being funded by increasing percentages of corporate budget that wanted to create experiences for their customers. And then, of course, we had this happen. We had COVID, and we know what happened there, the coronavirus downward spiral on the events industry. I like this headline because it's the Financial Times. I also like how it says, as conferences are canceled around the world, some are questioning their value, not their safety. You have to recognize here, they're questioning their value. That is, are we getting our bang for our buck at some of these conferences? Are we achieving our objectives that we set out to achieve, given the cost, inconvenience, lack of sustainability, and other issues related to the events business? And then lo and behold, we had Zoom. And I don't know, how many here have used Zoom? Yeah. So here's, I'm an American living in the UK. I have talked more with my sister in Florida in the last 2 years than I have in the previous 10. I know her little dog now. He knows me over the screen. I've seen her new car. We share recipes, all on Zoom. In fact, we now have a Zoom call pretty much once a month and catch up. And my brother in Philadelphia and his wife join in. Sometimes my nieces and nephews from various places around the world join in. And it's amazing what it's the amazing change that it's inspired in a lot of the ways that people meet and a lot of the ways that people stay in touch with one another. But the events industry really wasn't happy with this, and I'll tell you, most of the events folks that were writing about the events industry, they were focused on this. They were saying, yeah, Zoom, yeah, but it's exhausting. I get Zoom fatigue. It'll never take off. Yeah, you can talk to anybody in the world for free. Yes, you can communicate with your colleagues. You don't have to commute to the office. Yes, you can do all these things, but nothing's ever going to replace people coming together in a live setting and this without getting this kind of fatigue thing that they were afraid you would catch. And of course, the events industry got really stubborn about this and said, we're waiting for trade shows to come back, and we're not going to budge, and we don't buy this whole technology thing, and we never have, because we only think the real way to meet is face-to-face in big convention halls with lots of plywood and carpet, and that's what we're going to continue to do. And sure enough, wow, 2022, as we go halfway through the year, meetings and events look like they're coming back. So all of that fortuitously came true, I guess. Enough pent-up demand, enough comfortable with the way we've always done things, events have continued, again, to have this sort of recovery. And in fact, this event is set to be a more successful show than in 2019, which is a pretty amazing thing. I actually spoke at the event in 2019. I think this event looks much better. I think it looked great. I think it's a really good-looking event with lots of people, lots of conversations, and lots of activity. So surely events are coming back. And of course, we live in this world now. They're back. We live in this world now where we're all comfortable with this idea of the experience economy. which is, people would rather have experiences than things, where the way we learn today and the way we experience the world is changing and different. And so experiences have increased in value. Everybody knows this model here they usually use, Joseph Pine uses it describing coffee. He says a coffee bean is a commodity. It's traded in volume. If you ground the coffee, it's a product or a goods. If you brew the coffee, it's a service. And if you serve it in Starbucks, it's an experience. And at every level, it increases in value, even though ultimately it's a commodity. And the same is true with a lot of what we're doing in terms of experiences. There's crafting experiences that create enhanced value for our attendees and enhanced value for our proposition. But I always like to say, but hold on a minute. Let's not move so fast to sort of say that the recovery is totally back on board. And I don't know, my life has changed pretty dramatically in terms of how I work and the technology I use, and I think for most of it, it's true. So when, this is the big question, when can we go back to normal and start, resisting technology and ignoring changing customer needs? I mean, when's that going to happen? And my position on this, and I'm working with lots of agencies and their customers, is that it's not likely to go backwards. And what's really interesting, it reminds me of a story when I was in publishing. I worked for a company called International Data Group, and they published Computer Volca, PC Welt, PC Magazine, PC World, Computer World, lots of those kinds of publications. And the chairman was a guy by the name of Pat McGovern. And this was back quite a long time ago. It was back when online publishing first emerged. We went to a conference in New York City called Siebold Seminars. And I saw Pat in the audience. He was keynoting, and I saw him in the audience. Lots of people were talking to him. And then he went up on stage, and he said, a lot of you have been trying to be really encouraging here, and you said, Pat, don't worry. This online publishing thing is never going to take off. I mean, who wants to read into this little screen? It's never going to happen, okay? And he goes, that kind of made me nervous, because I remember back when TV emerged, everybody in radio said, who wants to watch a person reading into a microphone? Our ability to actually understand its potential and its scope sometimes allows us to underestimate its influence. And I think we need to be careful that we don't step in that trap like radio did. Now, radio still exists, but we know the influence that television has had on our world. And of course, I love this because it is I think it is the Daily Mail. So for those of you who live in the UK, you may think of this as not legitimate, but there's lots of things you can see online now where famous people are talking about internet being a passing fad. What is this internet thing anyway? And why do we need to use it? And millions are giving up on it, like millions are giving up on event technology, and event technology companies are having to be restructured. Ha, ha, ha. They thought they were really going to have a breakthrough, and now live events are back, and they're being restructured and not getting the financing they wanted. And who wins in that? I'm not really sure, but that's the kind of news you see in the paper all the time. Okay? But yet, the facts are we're living through one of the most compelling periods of technology innovation in history. There's been more technology development. In fact, the head of Intel says the last 2 years is seen more technology innovation than the last 10 in terms of new technology development. And it's going somewhere, right? And we know it is because we've changed and our approach to technology has changed. Does anybody know what this is? Do you know this cow can think it's in a sunny, warm, spring day field, makes it more productive, even though it's standing out in a muddy, rainy field? Yep, we've changed. And that's because, 41% of the global population of 7.7 billion, I think it's actually just reached 8 this recently, is 24 or under. So a whole new generation growing up, now entering the workforce, who have grown up with phones and computers. A good friend of mine, Barrett, has a 4-year-old, and he was saying he keeps going up to the TV, scrolling on it, trying to move things, and he's 4. So you can just imagine our world has changed. Look, we don't work the same way. We don't network the same way. We always talk about these conferences being big networking opportunities. We're talking hundreds of millions of users daily communicating. In fact, most of you have been online networking more than you were with people here today. And that's a fact, because that's how we network today. We don't shop the same. Christ, even my mother-in-law, who's in her 80s, post-COVID, still does her grocery shop now online. She used to it used to be a great thing for her to go to the supermarket. She used to love it. But now, well, she just does it online. She buys on Amazon, as do I. I'm known as the king of Amazon in my house. Need a screwdriver? Boom, I got it tomorrow. No problems. And that's how we shop. In fact, my daughter often goes into shops, and then goes home and buys it online. We don't drive the same way. Our cars are getting smarter than we are. They tell you slow down. They grab your steering wheel and move you to the left and move you to the right. They make bonging noises if there's a police officer coming up ahead. They know more about what's going on around us than we do. And with increasing number of satellites in space, all this kind of geographic information is going to be real time. And that's within the next year to two. So we'll be able to be tracking people in real time. You'll be able to track traffic patterns and everything else in terms of where you're driving. We don't learn the same way. And there's been a huge amount of data now that says that online learning and computer-assisted learning has helped lots and lots, kids perform better, actually, through this kind of education and through this kind of learning. And of course, kids today as young as 4 and 5 are getting their first mobile phones and entertaining themselves in different ways on television. I mean, I don't think when my kids are home, they're in their 20s. When they come home, I don't think there's ever a regular terrestrial station ever played on the TV. I'm pretty sure there's not. We don't play the same way. 425 million registered users on Fortnite. That's a lot of users, and most of them are really quite young, quite comfortable in a virtual world. We may not be. You're my age. You spend most of your time looking at the ceiling trying to figure out how to get back down. But these kids know how to do it. And then if you think about this, Roblox, half the US kids are playing Roblox, and they're now having party. You can have your birthday party on Roblox. Amazing as a kid. Okay, here's the other thing. 250 million registered users on Roblox. 46% of them are under 12. Do you know what? We're going to continue doing this? I'm just wondering if we're really facing up to the facts about what's happening in our industry. We have a whole new generation coming up that's going to say, there's a lot more they can do online. And look, we don't even attend events the same way. How many times, I was sitting in a session, last week, and this woman in front of me was filming the thing. I couldn't even see what was going on, filming the whole thing. Most of this is why I'm on stage and not down there is because this is being recorded and it's all going to be on demand. Because we live in a world now where events, we're partly here, we're partly knowing I could check that out later, we're partly checking our phones, we're partly looking at our computer, we're partly living in this world. We live in this hybrid world of live and online. And we are seeing experiences starting to change too. And here's the classic, for those of you who know Tony Robbins, he's a inspirational speaker kind of guy. He's turned to Zoom to have very large numbers of calls. So many of you may know Marco Gilberti. Now, I have to confess that his quote, if you can read it, I'll read it out. But he says, if we want to keep live events as a multi-trillion-dollar healthy and growing industry, we'll need to engage in tech and digital instead of ignoring it or fighting it. The next decade will bring serious innovation to our industry. Innovation is always challenging, and some players in each industry category, event organizers, exhibitors, venues, service providers, planners, will need to evolve and to adjust to a new reality or pay the consequences. Now, Marco Gilberti I know him for a million years. We worked together back in the Comdex days. He's a trade show guy, an investor, has bought and sold lots of trade shows and trade show organizing companies. So for him to say this is, in my mind, pretty informative. He's no dumb guy. He kind of knows this business really well. So we have this gap between what happened, this almost enforced break in the road. By the way, it's Highway 1, which really did happen, really did break. And so we have a choice to make how we want to manage going forward. How do we want to embrace the future versus go back? I keep hearing people build back better, build back better. And still their metric is how many people showed up. Not who showed up, not necessarily what happened, not whether it was a great experience, just how many people showed up. It's the age-old metric, how many people, okay? We know moving forward at events, audiences are going to have much more control over what they do because we live in this hybrid world where we're partly online, partly live. We can zone things out. I can't tell you, as the MD of George P. Johnson, how many corporate keynotes I've stood in the back of the room and saw nothing but blue screens. You think they were taking notes? Not a chance. They were doing email, they were writing, because they just checked out. Why? Because it was the VP up there of marketing or the VP of some product category basically selling. And they were all just sitting there zoned out. Increasingly, we have control over how we use our attention. Even if our attention span isn't shrinking, we have more control over how we use it. The other thing is it's all about me, guys. I don't know about you, but it's all very personal, isn't it? Experiences need to kind of know who I am and be more structured around what I prefer and what I find important and what I don't find important and not waste my time. And that means knowing a lot more about our audiences than we ever did in the past. It's not that we didn't collect data on audiences. We did. It's that we didn't know what to do with it once we collected it. Our analytics have been very poor generally in the events industry. And again, we counted on that thing, how many, and then nothing went wrong. That's the other mantra of a successful event. It was flawless. Nothing went wrong. And lots of people came, so big success. That metric is going to change as we become more personalized and more demanding, and that means we're going to need new approaches. Here's two young scientists that you can see here, and I've been finding this in the agencies I'm working in. You know, they're looking at people with psychology backgrounds, certainly technology skills, lots of different kinds of people from diverse areas that can help them come in and really understand their audiences better. Not just demographically, like it's 70% male and 20% this, but who they are. Who are these people? And what do we need, how do we need to inspire them or engage them in order to achieve our objectives? Why are we having this event in the first place? And that is going to require a different approach than the one we've traditionally used, which is, and I've been in the room 1,000 times, how many people? Where? Are there breakout sessions? Are we having a dinner? Is there a party? How many days? No one said, why are we having this? What are you trying to achieve? Are you sure an event's the right way to achieve it? Because that's not how we're structured. Event people plan parties. Everybody knows that. And look, who wants to go to an event and not do anything? I think this whole idea of sitting passively in a room is getting old. I mean, we don't even do it in our own sitting rooms anymore. You know, we've got TV on, we've got our phone right here, we've got, you know, things happening all around us. The idea of not getting engaged and not doing things. You ever notice like an association event, you got like the, the American Heart Foundation meeting of all the greatest minds in heart, about the heart come together for a meeting. And they don't actually solve anything. They don't actually, there's nothing on the table that they said we make a commitment to try to solve a problem since we're all together. We have all these experts together. Couldn't we do something? Isn't that what events are about? People coming together, solving problems, creating momentum, doing things. But yet we haven't typically looked at it that way. We typically have looked at it more like, you guys just sit there and we'll dance like monkeys. Okay. And also content. We're spoiled for content. We have the most amazing access to content today than you could possibly imagine. Online, on TV, everywhere that you look. Frankly, content is incredible. It's generally not the case in many live events still. It's still very one-dimensional content that you can't engage with, you can't interact with, and you can't even contribute to. You may have your own ideas about content that you can't contribute to. That's not going to be sustainable. Look, more people are looking for stuff on demand. Actually, I think the last time I spoke here, as I was leaving the thing, someone said, is this going to be online? Because they wanted to just watch the talk. They weren't like taking notes. They wanted to know if they could see the presentation later online. On-demand's becoming a requirement, not a nice to have, in terms of how we interact with people. Shareability. I saw a lot of selfies being taken out there, tons, people sharing things. I'm in Barcelona, you're not. Absolutely important for all the experiences we create. And also, the whole idea of tech-enabled mixed reality kinds of experiences. I know a lot of people are saying metaverse is bullshit. You know what? You're wrong. You can trust me on that one. You're wrong. The metaverse is not bullshit. The metaverse isn't what we think it is. And what exists today is not the metaverse. They're gaming platforms, and they're not interoperable. Imagine creating an avatar that's AI-enabled, that lives in a world that sort of shadows your navigation of the world online. This is Web3, in this now three-dimensional internet environment versus a flat internet environment. And it's starting to learn more about you than you remember about you. It's reminding you of things. It's going, hey, Kim, it's like 3 o'clock. Don't you want to watch Rick Stein in Mexico? That kind of thing. So, there's that. We're going to have this. And actually, weirdly, I was at a conference in Slovenia recently, and they were talking about your avatar. Imagine that you have an AI-enabled avatar who literally learns your personality from you over a period of time. And then when you die, it lives on being you, so that your kids can talk to your avatar to ask your opinion. Very weird, but that's the kind of world that we're on the verge of, and I wouldn't underestimate it. Here, my favorite one here, 200,000 Buddhists meet to celebrate using Zoom as a technology. You wouldn't think Buddhist monks are into technology. They're not. They're into community. They're into bringing their community together and gathering, and they would need to do it in the most efficient, most sustainable, and least aggressive way. And they've turned to technology to help them do that. And of course, sustainability. This is a tricky one because we all now, there's committees, there's little event teams and groups all focused on sustainability, but we know we're not being sustainable. I don't think you could look out there and say, that's sustainable. I don't think we're living up to any kind of standards out there if we're really honest with ourselves. There's always going to have to be trade-offs if we're going to want to fly people all over the world, and we're going to want to put them up in hotels and have them take taxis and come into these places with all of this architecture that's built everywhere and the air conditioning and I just don't know how you get around that, So to say that it's sustainable it's tricky. It gets really tricky. It reminds me one time that I was doing an event for a big, I won't tell you who they are because they'll be mad at me, but a big tech company, corporate tech company. And they used to do this event in the summer, and it was for their sales people. They called it the Global Sales Meeting, GSM. And they flew 20,000 people into Las Vegas in the middle of the summer when it's almost 100 degrees or higher outside. They put them in these big hotels and this casino, and basically had a week long of parties, and I think they had Aerosmith one year for 1.2 million as their band. All this air-conditioned facility, lots of food and beverage stations, just this whole blowout thing. And then the story goes that the CEO at the time was sitting in one of the keynotes, and the keynote featured two of their VP executives in sweatsuits riding bicycles to show how little power consumption their servers required. And that was their eco story. And I think he even recognized, wait a minute, this doesn't work. This doesn't work. If we really want to be a sustainable company, we can't do this. So he went to the sales management and said, what happens if I cancel the sales meeting? They didn't know. Would it affect sales? They weren't sure. They really didn't have data to demonstrate. So what do you think he said? Let's cancel the sales meeting. Yeah. So I worked for the agency that actually put on that sales meeting. So we were going hamina, because that was like $11 million. And we decided to take it online, and we created the global sales experience for them, all online, saved huge carbon, saved huge travel rates, travel time, hotel rates, just huge amount of environmental waste, food waste, just amazing. We surveyed, and it was cool too, it was a really interesting thing, and this was in 2009, by the way. We interviewed the sales team and said, what did you think of the global sales experience? And they said, really hard to drink beer through a screen. So what did they start doing? They started having regional events where they could drink beer and still doing the online event where they could time sync speakers from all around the world. And authentic is really important. That's a classic example of being inauthentic. An event here one time I was doing in Barcelona, they insisted on having these recycling bins. This was 10 years ago, so I'm sure it's changed. But yet, all these recycling bins were being dumped in the same skip behind the venue. And when we said, they said, oh no, that can't happen. You have to tell them it has to be separated out. And we go back and they were like laughing in Spanish. Anyway, they came up with a number and said, well, it'll cost this. And the client was like, okay, well, we're not doing that. And we still had the recycling boxes. Okay. Also, listen, I think a lot of us now in business want to give back a little, and I think it's really important that we do, including to the communities where we do business. I'm not sure how we're helping the city of Barcelona other than taxi drivers and restaurants and hotels, but I'm wondering if there's other causes in Barcelona that we could be contributing to. But it's really important to realize that this technology can be really powerful. I just talked about Zoom with my family. Well, in a nursing home, an old people's home in my village where I live in West Sussex, they were having problems because the residents weren't allowed to have guests. They weren't allowed to have visitors. And so the village pooled funding together, and we got them a big screen TV, we got them a laptop, and they started having Zoom calls. Zoom calls with their families. They became so popular that Zoom calls were booked up till the cows came home. Wow, when we found out we could do Zoom calls with their family, not only the family that usually visited them, but other family that may live further away, it was incredibly powerful and uplifting for the patients. It actually improved their well-being in a dramatic way. Then, when we told them we could all go on a tour of the Tate Gallery online, even more fun, even more things we could do that we weren't doing before. They were just sitting in a room staring out the window. So just imagine, allow yourself to imagine how we can use this technology to improve events and improve what we do in really meaningful ways. And of course, I love this because I really think this is important, this idea of really creating innovation, not being afraid to fail, not being afraid to try new things. And I love that Disney appoints a guy to oversee metaverse strategy, and he says the metaverse is the next great storytelling frontier. Okay, I always run over. So, do we just give up? Buckminster Fuller, called to be the architects of the future, not its victims. No, I say we embrace change, and we look at ways of incorporating this stuff into our daily thinking, and that means a new frame of mind in terms of what we do. Rather than fearing the future, it's engaging with the future and understanding it. Event planner to experience designer. I teach for the Event Academy in the UK. And I can tell you, all of those students, what interests them most about the events industry is the idea of experience design, not events logistics. They love the whole idea that they're creating interesting experiences. I had a whole class of folks from Saudi Arabia, where, by the way, 75% of the population is under 30 in Saudi Arabia, building ginormous money-fueled experiential structures, including one of the biggest aquariums in the desert coming up, just to give you an idea of what's going on there. And those kids are fired up to use technology and to become designers. And because, again, it's all about people. And we need to ask why. I use this in my training course a lot, and I say, what is going on here? And almost everybody goes, those neighbors don't like each other. Really? Maybe the neighbor on the right really likes snow. Maybe there's no neighbor. Maybe they just wanted substance. We don't know. And if we don't ask the questions of our audience, if we don't ask the questions, we're not going to find out, and we're not going to be able to apply it. And the first key to that is to just admit you don't know what you don't know. I love this. This is the body of all possible knowledge. You know what you know. You think you know what you don't know. Like, trust me, I don't know brain surgery. But mostly, you don't know what you don't know. And yet, we tend to keep ourselves very much like this. My son always says that. He said, Dad, they call you an expert. Like, are you an expert on the past or an expert on the future? It's a good question. It's a very good question, actually. And that's the drunkard's paradox, is looking outside your comfort zone. Everybody knows this story. Drunk, looking on the ground, patting on the ground. Policeman walks over and says, what are you doing? He's under a lamppost. And he says, I'm looking for my keys. I dropped my keys. Policeman gets down and says, you dropped your keys right here under the lamppost. He goes, no, I dropped them over there across the street. He said, well, why are you looking here? And he goes, oh, the light is much better here, across the street, and that's why I'm going to look for them here. And of course, as Roshi said, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. To the expert's minds, there are very few. And I don't know how many event planner bosses I've worked with in the past that said, I've been doing this event for 16 years. It's gone off flawless every year. We're not changing anything. And last year's survey, people seem to really like the coffee in this certain area, so we're going to have the coffee there again. Okay. Avoid myopic thinking, and this is really interesting for the events industry because we think of ourselves as being in the events industry. But what's the value of events? Are we in the community building business? Are we in the communications business? Are we in the education business? What business are we in, actually? Where does our clients and our audiences derive value rather than locking ourselves in? The big story here is American railroads fought so hard to keep the railroads alive, they didn't realize they were in transportation. And we're doing the same thing in the events industry. We're building back. We're building back. It's coming back. It's coming back. I don't get it. And diversity, the session just before this one or the one before that, talked about this idea of diversity. Diversity is not a nice to have in your organization. It's a necessity. Some of the best ideas come outside of your knowledge area. The more you hang around with people just like you, the more you'll keep doing the same thing. I think having new ideas, cross-pollination of ideas, the intersection of ideas is where we create real value. That's really important, that diversity is not seen as a nice thing to do. It's an essential thing to do for businesses and for profitability and to be competitive. And of course, the Medici effect. Two ideas come together, create a third, more powerful idea. Sometimes we need to just look outside of our own industry even and say, what are other people doing to create value that we could take advantage of? And there are lots of, this is a great book, by the way, if you haven't read it. It's a fantastic book about how architects are following the patterns of how beetles build mounds in the desert to build self-air-conditioned buildings. And don't feel failure. I think this whole thing about the events industry is, it just seemed to me that every client I ever had was just scared to death that they were going to do something that would screw up, there'd be a line that was too long, the coffee would be cold, something would be messed up. Everything was about the details of the don't screw up thing, and very few. So that's why you don't want to actually try anything new, because it might not work. And clearly, if you don't try new things, you don't progress. You really don't. And I think so it's really important that we do that. As David Bowie says, he doesn't actually think the past exists anymore, so he doesn't spend a lot of time thinking about it. Actively embrace the future. Throw the naysayers out and be the change that you want to see in the world. Take control. You make the change. And it'll change our industry for the better. That's it. Thank you.